So what does this new Congress mean for Donald Trump's agenda, including a new NAFTA with Canada? Capri Cafaro is a former Democratic state senator for Ohio, and Boyd Matheson is the former chief of staff to Republican Senator Mike Lee, and they both join me now from Washington. Hi to both of you. Thanks for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thank you.
Great to be with you.
Capri, I'll start with you. Nancy Pelosi, in that clip that we heard, talked about a bipartisan and unifying message, or she had that message. She used those words. How likely do you think that is?
Unfortunately, I don't think it's particularly likely. I think there will be some areas, for example, when it comes to infrastructure funding for roads and bridges, areas, for example, as well in regards to making the middle class individual tax cut permanent, which currently is not. There might be some areas in which Democrats and Republicans can work together and should work together. But I think in the short term right now, really what Nancy Pelosi, I think, is trying to set up is a Democratic Congress that is trying to present themselves as more unifying, because as in juxtaposition to President Trump, who's been perceived as someone who, as a personality, has been more divisive. But as evidenced by what's happening right now with the government shutdown and no one's willingness to budge on this border wall funding issue, I don't think we're going to see any bipartisan activity anytime soon, to the peril, frankly, of our country.
Boyd, what do you think? I mean, the president also came out with a pretty, nice comment about Ms. Pelosi, an optimistic tone during a press briefing today. He says he thinks he can work with Speaker Pelosi. Do you think that kind of tone, that kind of attitude will last?
Well, I think it will. I think Capri is right in terms of it will be very selective. The one thing about President Trump is that he doesn't have relationships. Everything is a transaction. And that's why I think he will be able to do deals with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. And he may do that on Monday morning, and then he may annihilate them on Facebook and Twitter later in the day. But everything is just a singular transaction. And I think Nancy Pelosi understands that better than a lot of people in Washington, even Mitch McConnell in the Senate, who thinks he has a relationship with the president because they're of the same party. So I think the other important lesson for Nancy Pelosi is to not do what the Republicans did during the Obama administration, which is that they became the party of no and obstruction and no vision. And so they were constantly seen as no vision, and that's a challenge. And I think the Democrats trying to ramp up for 2020 would do well to worry less about investigations, less about digging in and obstructing, but really looking for those deals, for those transactions that they can make. And Capri nailed it. Infrastructure, middle-class tax, child tax credit being permanent as part of the tax reform. There are opportunities for it. It just depends whether they go policy or whether they choose to play politics. That's
an interesting point, Capri. How likely do you think it is that sort of that shiny object, that ability to just fight Donald Trump constantly, won't be the trap that they fall into?
Well, I think there's going to be a divide, frankly, between the House Democrats, those that have been recently elected, within this new, very large and very diverse class of freshman Democrats, many of whom skew more partisan, many of whom were elected because of, at least in part, because of their opposition to Donald Trump. So I think that there will be, a push and pull between, more seasoned and veteran legislators like Speaker Pelosi, who understands how to cut a deal and also understands that it does not help Democrats to be divisive overall if they want to win in 2020. Democrats would really hurt themselves if they just play into President Trump's hand as someone who's obstructionist and a party who just wants to do nothing but stand for trying to impeach him or get rid of him. So I think what's going to happen is that there's going to be this back and forth between a faction of the Democratic Party who really wants to see this kind of gung-ho and investigative strategy, and others that want to take a more temperate approach. And it's going to be up to Speaker Pelosi to figure out a way to strike that balance and get things done.
Capri mentioned cutting a deal. Boyd, speaking of deals, we are very concerned or focused on one here in Canada, and that's, of course, the USMCA or the new NAFTA, whatever you want to call it. Nancy Pelosi has been one of the more outspoken critics of this deal in the Democratic Party. How likely do you think it is that she and other Democrats will impede its passage in Congress?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a real test for her leadership. She is going to have the challenge described that it is like herding cats there in the House. So she is going to have that, especially with some of those newer members who maybe want to tilt a little more to the political fights as opposed to the policy fights. But I think Nancy Pelosi will find the deal on that. Obviously, what happens between the United States and Canada is a big deal, and it's a deal that matters not just to the United States and Canada, but really has impact on the rest of the world. And so I think she is going to see that there is a path on that. I think cooler heads will prevail. I think it will move through both the House and the Senate, and the president will get that signed into law.
Capri, you're nodding. You think cooler heads will prevail as well?
I do think so. I think for a few reasons. One being that Democrats have always been more quote unquote pro-fair trade. So any kind of efforts to make our trade imbalance more balanced is something that Democrats would usually support. But I also think we need to look at some of the more local or more provincial issues for individual members of Congress when you're dealing with things like dairy, timber, automobile and automotive related issues. Those are the things where, Democrats may lose some votes here and there because there are specific things that they feel are in this agreement that may directly impact their local economy. And so that's always something that needs to be concerned about. The other part of it is that we have something called fast track authority here in the United States, where essentially it's an up or down vote, so there's no amendments that could be brought into it or anything like that. So you have to vote for what's in front of you, and that's what members of the House are going to have to do.
The president, Boyd, has actually said that he will tear up NAFTA in order to make sure that Congress is faced only with a decision between a new NAFTA or nothing at all. How likely do you think that actually, or how, do you think he will actually make good on that threat?
Yeah, I don't think he'll have to do that in the end, but he's certainly shown that he's willing to repeal something in order to get conversations going on other things. He did that with DACA. He's done that in some health care measures. So he's definitely not afraid to say, okay, we're going to end this in 3 months or 6 months, so you better get working and get something done. So he definitely would do that if push came to shove in order to get Congress to act. And it's an important thing that Congress does act. It's what they were sent there to do, and I'm sure it's part of the things that your viewers scratch their heads about, is how can they sit there and not get something done, because that's really what their job is. And the president will push them to do that, making sure that it's what's in the best interest of the country, and really, as you look at the international opportunities for that, and then how does that actually apply on the local level? It all comes together. I don't think he's going to have to tear up NAFTA, but I wouldn't put it past him if push came to shove.
I'm glad you brought up scratching our head, because I did want to ask you about the government shutdown, Capri. Definitely a lot of us here, and not just this one, there have been other government shutdowns as well. Is there an end in sight here, given the swearing in? How do you see this playing out, or is this just a stalemate for a long time?
Well, there's been about 20 government shutdowns since 1977, 3 of which have happened in the last 12 months, which is the most since actually back in 1977 or 1978. So as you mentioned, this is not the first time that this has happened, nor will it be the last. I actually think that this is going to go on for a little while, because neither Democrats nor Republicans are going to blink. I think that both are very set in their ways. Democrats have made it very clear they do not want to give money on this border wall. Republicans and President Trump in particular said they're not going to sign anything. President Trump ultimately has the authority here to sign something into law, and if he doesn't want to, it doesn't become law. So unless and until President Trump says he would sign something that either doesn't include border funding or has a lower number, I think we're going to be here for quite some time, which means at least 25% of our government will be furloughed, shut down, and we have hundreds of thousands of individuals that are going without pay and still doing their duties here in the United States.
Boyd, what do you think? How long is this thing going to last?
I think it is going to go on for a little bit here, which is sad. And the real problem here I actually put on the Republicans in the Senate. The fact that Leader McConnell has said we won't take a vote until there has been a deal between the president and Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats in the House. That's not the way the United States government is supposed to work. Nothing happens until there are votes taken. And what I think the president ought to do, the president ought to go sit on, there's a wooden bench in between, in the rotunda between the House and the Senate. And he should go sit there and say, you all need to go in and you need to have a debate, and you need to compromise, and you need to have votes in front of the American people. That's what you were called here to do. And then work it through. And I'll sit here on this bench until you get it done, and then I'll decide if I'm going to sign it or not. But it really is, again, I really do think the Senate Republicans hold a lot of the blame on here, because they could bring up votes. They could bring up the House bill. They could bring up other bills that have a number lower than $5 billion or $4 billion or $3 billion, and force everyone to talk about it, to vote on it, to amend it, to compromise, to debate in front of people, not behind closed doors, and take votes. And the president should force that kind of action. That would actually be really good for the country and actually bring the shutdown to a close much, much sooner.
All right, I have to leave it there, but thank you so much to both of you. Really appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
That's Capri Cafaro and
Great
Boyd
to be with you.
Matheson. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.